In military history, there are certain names that they hit you differently. They evoke this incredible sense of brutal, raw endurance, and the Chosen Few is right at the top of that list. Today, we're diving into their legendary story of survival against, well, what should have been impossible odds. So picture this. It's late 1950. The Korean War is supposed to be all but over. Victory parades are practically being planned. But for about 30,000 UN troops way up in the frozen mountains of North Korea, a horrific 17-day fight for their very lives was just about to begin. So how did this all go so wrong so fast? Well, it really comes down to a fatal mix of overconfidence on one side and a colossal intelligence failure. The stage was absolutely set for a disaster of epic proportions.
The UN forces, led by the legendary General Douglas MacArthur, were pushing north, and they were moving fast. They even had this incredibly optimistic name for the offensive: Home by Christmas. The goal seemed simple enough: get to the Yalu River, right on the Chinese border, and the war would be over.
The problem was, all that confidence was built on a complete and utter illusion. While UN commanders were thinking about victory, China's Chairman Mao had secretly given the order. A massive army was already on the move, slipping across the border like ghosts in the night, totally undetected.
And the sheer scale of this hidden army was, well, it's hard to even wrap your head around it. 120,000 soldiers. The Chinese People's Volunteer Army had literally melted into the mountains surrounding a place called the Chosin Reservoir. And they were just waiting. And marching right toward them, only about 30,000 UN troops, mostly American Marines and soldiers. They were stretched out in a long, thin line along a single road. Outnumbered 4-1, they were walking completely blind into a perfectly set trap.
On the night of November 27th, 1950, snap, that trap sprung. The Chinese army attacked from every direction, and in an instant, the UN forces weren't just fighting one enemy. They were fighting two. The soldiers swarming down from the hills and the absolutely brutal, unforgiving cold.
You know, this famous quote from the Marine commander, General Oliver P. Smith, it just perfectly captures the spirit of these guys. They were completely surrounded, but they refused to believe they were beaten. There was no retreat. They were going to fight their way out.
And as if fighting tens of thousands of enemy soldiers wasn't enough, Mother Nature herself decided to join the fight. A Siberian cold front slammed into the area, and the temperatures plummeted to an unimaginable -36 degrees Fahrenheit. The cold itself became a weapon just as deadly as any bullet.
I mean, the effects of the cold were just devastating. The gel lubricant on their guns turned solid, jamming weapons. Medics had to stick frozen morphine tubes in their own mouths to thaw them out just to treat the wounded. Blood plasma froze solid. Batteries died. Frostbite alone took out over 7,300 men. It was a whole other kind of warfare.
And, to make this chaotic situation even worse, you had a real clash between the commanders. The Army's General Almond was all about speed, pushing his guys forward aggressively. But the Marine General Smith, he was way more cautious. He had a bad feeling. And that caution led him to slow down and set up supply dumps along the way, a decision that turned out to be absolutely critical for what was to come.
If you want a single snapshot of just how desperate things were, look no further than what happened to Task Force Faith. This was an army unit guarding the flank. They were cut off, surrounded, and just shattered. Out of 2,500 men, they lost over 1,000 just trying to break out. It was a complete nightmare.
So they're encircled, they're freezing, they're fighting for every single inch. What do? Well, there was only one option left. They had to fight their way out down a single 78-mile-long mountain road all the way to the sea.
But the Chinese had one last card to play, and it was a deadly one. At a deep gorge called Funchilin Pass, they blew up a key bridge. Just like that, the only escape route was gone. The entire column was now totally, completely trapped.
So that was the question, right? How in the world do you build a bridge across a giant chasm in the middle of a battle in some of the worst weather on planet Earth? The answer is, well, it's the stuff of legend.
They did what sounds completely impossible. The engineers got on the radio and called for an emergency airdrop. And in this incredible feat of flying, Air Force planes actually parachuted 8 massive, nearly 3,000-pound bridge sections down into this tiny mountain pass. Under constant fire, the engineers worked all through the freezing night, putting it all together. And by morning, the gap was bridged and the columns started to cross.
And you gotta remember, that bridge was just one obstacle. For 78 miles, every single foot of that road was a battle. They fought through roadblock after roadblock, ambush after ambush, and they refused to leave anyone behind. They carried their wounded, their gear, and their dead the entire way. But reaching the coast, that wasn't the end of the story. Not by a long shot. It was only then, in the aftermath, that the true, staggering cost of this entire ordeal really became clear.
What happened next has been called the greatest evacuation by sea in U.S. military history. A huge fleet of 193 ships came in and rescued not only 105,000 soldiers, but also, amazingly, 98,000 North Korean civilians who were desperate to flee. Then, on Christmas Eve, with everyone safely on board, they blew up the port and sailed away.
The human cost was it's breathtaking. UN forces had over 17,000 casualties, and look at that. Almost half of them were from the cold alone. But for the Chinese, the losses were catastrophic. They were so poorly equipped for the winter that they lost over 50,000 men. More of them froze to death than were actually killed in combat. An entire army was basically destroyed.
The survivors, the ones who made it out of that frozen hell, would be known forever after as the Chosen Few. And that name has become a badge of honor, a symbol of incredible courage and the sheer will to live against all possible odds.
So how do you even file this one away in the history books? On one hand, it was a withdrawal. UN forces were kicked out of North Korea. But on the other hand, you have 30,000 men who escaped an army of 120,000, smashed multiple enemy divisions in the process, and came out the other side as a cohesive fighting force. So was it a crushing defeat? Or was it one of the most legendary tales of survival in military history? The story of the Chosen Few really makes you question what victory even means.